story. Hopefully my siblings don't mind our Marxist perspective. No, I'm just Mennonite perspective. We actually did have a Mennonite Marxist professor at Trinity, but before I get to the life story, she'll be telling the serious story. I just want to add a few words of introduction. It seems almost impossible to summarize the life of a man who meant so much to so many people here. So many people who couldn't make it here. The life of a man who, to some of you, might have been a friend, a neighbor, a racquetballer, a golf buddy. To others, he was a cousin, an uncle, a brother, a father, a husband to one, and yes, even a pastor. I say pastor last because although I'm a preacher's son, yes, he was a reverend clergyman, sometimes mislabeled a priest, even the strangest title of all, a man of the cloth. In spite of this, the most common thing I remember while growing up, people found out what my dad did for a living, was the response, but he seems so normal. I don't know what people expected, but they always seemed surprised that he was such a regular guy. My personal opinion about why he was so normal is because my dad was not afraid to engage in and appreciate popular culture. He was an above average sports fan. I've taken that to the next level, but he was a car guy. He was reasonably fashion conscious. I'm not sure about the fur fedora hats he wore to my hockey games in the 80s, but he liked his floor-shine shoes, and Dad followed the news and politics, and he had a great appreciation for humor and satire. He loved music. If you don't include dancing, my dad was a pretty cultured guy. I'm not a pastor, but I think this is what a Bible teacher might call being in the world, not of it. So as my wife reads the proper history of my dad, I hope you don't mind if I chime in with some anecdotes and color commentary, my attempt to add some color to the life of this normal guy who lived his life in some way alongside all of you.
Peter Wesley Nikkel was born on July 17, 1941, to Jacob and Margaret Nikkel in Winkler, Manitoba. As the fifth of 12 children in a Mennonite family, Peter's early life was shaped by faith, hard work, and his close-knit family. Even from a young age, Peter faced life challenges with resilience, even the time he lost a toe in a tractor accident.
So maybe my dad wasn't that normal after all. He had 9 toes. Think about that. When I think back to the stories I heard most from my father about his growing up years, he told me about losing a toe and getting baptized. And in a strange way, these two stories might be linked in the way that they were experiences that made him feel set apart by God in a special way. Losing his toe was the obvious literal mark on him, the daily reminder of God's mercy. What could have been so much worse? He took the one toe that he didn't really need right beside his big toe. Could have been so much worse. So a reminder of God's mercy, just a unique reminder that he was different. But his baptism was an internal, the way that he would tell me the story, it was one of the greatest days of his life. Without a doubt, he said he felt God's Spirit, presence, and blessing. And in my mind, that was when he probably first felt the call to ministry on his life.
He attended the University of Winnipeg, and while there, he started his friendship and then his courtship with Diane Westman. Many letters were written, and their love was kindled. In July 1967, Peter married Diane, and they celebrated their honeymoon with Canada's Centennial in Quebec, and then worked as social workers for the year. Their adventures continued, and they moved to Chicago, where Peter attended Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. and while studying theology, Peter worked part-time as a Chicago city bus driver. He enjoyed telling about the time he accidentally drove a bus full of passengers down a one-way street in the busy city loop. During their years in Chicago, Peter and Diane welcomed their first two children, Peter Timothy and David Wesley.
I wish I had more memories of Chicago. My wife and I actually drove through Chicago this summer, just the two of us, and we had time to take some pictures and tour around the place of my birth. And my dad immediately, I took a picture in this obscure underground where the highway seemed to be under the city in downtown, and like, I didn't even get a chance to tell him where this picture was from. He immediately knew exactly this was downtown Chicago, so his recollection of those streets from his bus driving was incredible. But there was one story that I've been told about and that I've probably retold the most that speaks to my dad's other side job. He was a custodian in an office apartment building, and as I understand it, my parents had reduced rent because he took care of the cleaning duties in this building. So, it's also probably created some issues with like a new child. My dad, also give him a little grace. He was just learning how to be a father, but apparently he would allow me to come along on his janitor runs up and down the hallways. And this is a time, remember when, especially in office buildings, you'd have like ashtrays in the hallways and in the waiting room. I mean, this is 1970. So, my dad was good. He wanted to spend quality time with me, but he would often turn his back, and I'm told that I would frequently eat cigarette butts. So, I'm sure he became a better parent for my younger siblings.
Upon graduating from seminary, Peter and Diane answered a call to serve as senior pastor at Bridgeway Community Church in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. As a humble servant leader, Peter led with vision, passion, and a can-do attitude, which included the construction of a brand new church building and building into the faith of locals, including leading Peter Jr.'s kindergarten teacher to Christ. During the Saskatchewan years, the family grew as well with the addition of two more children, Rachel Christine and Jonathan Herman Jacob James. Yes, that's another story. The years in Swift Current were rich with friendships and memories that would last a lifetime.
The Swift Current years were so great for our family. Mom and Dad built that brand new home when I was 5. Dad became a baseball coach for David and I. He nurtured me in following his lead as becoming a golfer. I was a junior member at the golf club in town. Our family got our first station wagon. Mom accepted the fact that the rest of us became lifelong Saskatchewan Roughriders fans, even though she's a BC Lions fan. Maybe a Winnipeg Blue Bombers fan too, but I remember BC most. So many memories and so many joys. And some memories and joys that my dad's been able to relive and re-remember with his Swift Current friends recently, especially because we've got another connection in the next generation with Lincoln, having worked 2 summers at the Martins Ranch in Saskatchewan. So, very special time in our family's life.
In 1982, Peter was called to serve as lead pastor at Fraserview Mennonite Brethren Church in Richmond, BC. The family packed up their red station wagon and made their journey west with their 4 children. Peter's leadership at Fraserview was marked by innovation and a heart for outreach. He had a passion for sharing the good news of Jesus, and his vision led the church to launch many Christ-centered programs that touched the lives of countless people in the community.
What can I say about my dad in the 80s? My high school and university years. At a time that I should have been rebelling, my dad made it very difficult. By doing things like randomly showing up at home with a windsurfer that he bought just because it looked fun. We didn't have a lot of extra money for toys, but somehow he was able to get a dirt bike for all of us kids to share. Unfortunately, the coolest car that he ever owned, it happened in the 80s, but it was also the biggest disappointment. He somehow let a 1967 Pontiac Acadian go for next to nothing without us ever driving it.
By 1990, Peter and Diane were called to plant Panorama Community Church in Surrey, BC. The church thrived under Peter's leadership, growing so quickly that it relocated 2 times in its first 10 years. Panorama was a welcoming place for families young and old, and eventually merged with Peace Arch Church to become Grace Point Community Church. During this time, Peter and Diane began foster parenting, a ministry to children that would eventually lead to the joy of one more permanent child, Nicole. In 1996, Peter and Diane faced the most difficult journey when their son David passed away tragically at a scuba diving accident. The loss of David was a profound heartbreak for the Nikkel family and all who knew him.
So many of you were with us and our family through this time. Many have remarked about the joyful reunion that David and my dad now have. I'll just add that I remember Dad saying David was his greatest cheerleader, especially as a pastor. David was also the best windsurfer. And he had a heart for adventure that I can only imagine continued to cheer my dad on in his own journey and challenges and adventures that still lay ahead for him and my mom.
Peter loved competition, business, watching sports, playing golf, and running. He completed 2 marathons, the Victoria and the Boston marathons. And together with Diane, they walked both across England and Spain. Peter had a remarkable ability to remember names and brought his entrepreneurial spirit into his ministry, encouraging others to live generously and faithfully. Even in retirement, Peter and Diane continued to explore the world and grow in faith. After retiring from Grace Point, they moved to Guadalajara, Mexico with Nicole for 5 months to mentor pastors. And while there, they learned to speak and read Spanish, a skill they used for years as they read their Bible together in both Spanish and English. When Peter and Diane returned from Mexico, they felt led to Coast Hills Church in Surrey. They quickly became a source of encouragement for the congregation, and Peter stepped up as an associate pastor, continuing to serve faithfully even as he began to battle cancer. His optimism and belief that prayer makes a difference never wavered. Just this year, Peter wanted to inspire the church to pay off its mortgage, and through prayer and his leadership, the congregation responded. By July of this year, the mortgage was paid off in full, another incredible achievement that reflected Peter's faith and dedication.
Speaking of paying off mortgages, my parents were at some point able to pay their mortgage off, and you'll be happy to know that after years of Chryslers and Plymouths and hand-me-down Chevy celebrities that he got many, many sermon illustrations out of, thanks to Gertrude Clausen. And most recently his 400,000 kilometer plus minivan. You'll be happy to know he has a late model luxury SUV that he's left my mom to drive.
In July, Peter and Diane moved into their beautiful new condo in White Rock with a 10-story view of Mount Baker and the ocean. As Peter got weaker, Peter transitioned into hospice care, but even then, his ministry was not over. On September 15th, Peter made his last trip to our farm, Poplar Hill Farm, to perform one final act of ministry there, dedicating his great-grandson, Whitaker Kelly. The service took place in the family barn, and when it came time to pray, Peter insisted on standing. With the help of his son and grandsons, Peter stood to pray as he held Whitaker, an unforgettable moment. Peter leaves behind his beloved wife of 57 years, Diane, and his children, Peter and Janice, Rachel and Eldon, Jonathan and Erica, Nicole and Cole. His legacy continues to his 9 grandchildren, Tori and Silas Mathis, Lincoln and Kylie Nikkel, Virginia and Devin Kelly, and Louis and Stephanie Nikkel, Charlotte and Hunter Orgard, and Jim, Harriet, and Hank Nikkel. He's also survived by his great-grandchildren, Benjamin and McKinley Mathis, with a 3rd Mathis baby due in just a few weeks, and Whitaker Kelly. Peter's also survived by 10 siblings, Mary, James and Elfrida, Ruth and Roger, John and Mary Ann, Grace and Gerald, Esther and Herb, Anne, Sam and Bonnie, Dora, and David and Sheila. He was predeceased by his parents, Jacob and Margaret Nikkel, his sister Lydia, and his son, David. Peter was a pastor of pastors and saw the potential in everyone. He lived humbly, faithfully, and loved his family deeply. He was very proud of all his children and grandchildren and his great-grandchildren.
The last picture my dad asked to see over and over in his hospice was a picture of the barn that he built with his father and brothers, I believe. He absolutely loved that picture and describing the process of building the rafters. As a lover of architecture myself, I couldn't get enough of hearing my dad talk about that barn, about working on it with his dad and brothers. I had so much joy that he could stand one more time in the barn that I built with my sons, sometimes under my dad's supervision. He could stand one more time and pray a blessing on my grandson and our family. A barn, my dad always used to tell me, late at night, with the cattle sleeping on fresh straw, was his favorite place to be at peace. It's a fitting and beautiful image. A man of humble origins, a normal guy, experiencing extraordinary peace and joy. Love you, Dad.